This 2025 Acura Integra is a bit of an oddity in today's market. A premium compact sedan offered from what is still a somewhat accessible price point? Well, I think that warrants a closer look. The historic Acura Integra nameplate returned in 2023 after quite a lengthy hiatus. Adapting the existing 11th generation Honda Civic platform that won so many awards and that is built locally in Alliston, Ontario, the US-built Integra steps that up just a little bit more on trimmings and overall driving experience. Priced to somewhat overlap with, but not directly compete with Honda Civics, these Integras offer all the stability, all the responsibility, all the maturity that you would look to in that Civic, but with some nice leathery feeling textures and better audio and all of this. What's more, you can get it with a stick. There's a lot to go over here. So where do we begin? Well, Integras start in their base trim as what they call the A-Spec. That's just to make the base sound like it's a little bit spicier than it is. That used to come in from the mid-30s. However, priced today, these things are coming in from just under $40,000. And in the case of this here Elite A-Spec that's got some nice juicy middle path options for the series, well, you're looking at something around $42,000. For that money, well, you get a pretty nice experience. The headline there would be audio. These cars come with a standard 8-speaker setup, but in the case of the Civics, you can only go up to a 12-speaker Bose. This here uses something different though, and it'll let you go up to 16 speakers, including guys right up here. The result is something that punches well above what I think it should for its segment. This is not the best stereo by any means, but it's really rather enjoyable, and cranked up to moderate volumes, it comes through sounding like it has the right depth, the right experience that you would expect of a car like this. It's not perfect. The 3D effect still is best if you amplify it by nudging it back a little bit, but it's a really nice experience when you're out on the commute. And on that commute, well, you benefit from this basically being a Civic. Up front, we've got a 1.5-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. It doesn't put out a ton of power, just 200 horsepower, 182 pound-feet of torque. But put through a CVT that's an automatic that adjusts itself as it goes, it's quite all right. And better still, it's rather efficient, albeit not the greatest, but we're gonna get to that. In the everyday though, that pairs with a really rather nice set of driver assists. In particular, the adaptive cruise here is really quite steady, and while the lane keeping and so on is not quite as cutting edge as you're gonna get in some other models, it is still ultimately a really easy, low-strain way about, and significantly reduces your driver fatigue in rush hour traffic. But then we get to one of the cooler bits, which is that you don't have to get that CVT. No, you can still get this thing with a 6-speed manual, and that is dandy because I spent all of last week pedaling around one of these with a 6-speed, and while not my absolute favorite, it still feels a little bit cabley. It is a very sharp, notchy shifter, just as it is in the Civic Si. With that being said, those looking for a sporty driving experience will be at once pleased and a little disappointed here. You see, these things are known for a certain rev hang, which you can really feel in the Civic Si. That's basically just an emissions-conscious mapping that leaves a little bit of a delay as the revs come down when you let off the pedal, so that you're not just flushing a bunch of unburnt gas into the exhaust and burning out your catalytic converter. It's sensible, absolutely, but if you want to do some hot boy crap, well, that's gonna leave you wanting. Now, of course, if you want to do some hot boy crap and you can afford this, just get a Civic Type R or, an Integra Type S. I know, of course, those aren't actually just like easy decisions because they are significantly more money, but oh boy, are they fun. Those are absolutely the best front-wheel drive fun you can have on the market now. And pumping 300 horse out of a larger 2-liter version of this powertrain, man, oh man, they just friggin' burnt. You can spin tires all about town. Oh, it's awesome. If you're not looking to spin tires all around town though, the manual with this does still come with a limited slip diff up front, which is a nice little advantage for the sporty driving. And if you just get the CVT, it has these paddles here which simulate gear changes as though it were a conventional automatic with actual speeds and not just rubber bands. But that's a matter I'm not going to dive into today. Dialed back for the everyday, electric power steering in this makes this a very tractable and accessible car, and driven with a gentle foot, it's reasonably quiet as well. There are caveats to both of those, however. If you're driving with a little bit of enthusiasm, you may find that particularly in sport mode, the electric steering is really rather dull and indeed aggressively overweighted. It's rather like how BMW throws a little bit too much power assist into their electric power steering and it ends up feeling video gamey. This is like that, but in sporty stuff, it starts to feel like there's a delay, there's like a dampness, a sponge halfway down that steering column. On the noise front as well, there is actually a surprising bit of resonance that comes in from that rear end. Now, that's just because this is a hatch and it doesn't have an actual sealed off trunk like you would in a conventional sedan. That comes with big perks though, because you get an enormous cargo area in the back of this thing. That little shade there can come out and it just becomes a massive tube. It's not quite station wagon, but these 5-door hatches really do add quite a bit of utility to these, and especially if you're doing sports, skiing, what have you. That profile does come at some expense, however, to rear visibility. Shoulder checking in this thing is still manageable, and you've got blind spot indicators on the mirrors which help alleviate some of the anxiety there, but it's not quite what you'll be used to out of your old Civic sedan or Corolla or what have you. Looking forward, instruments are displayed on a pretty large digital cluster here, and you've got a little bit of customizability to it. I can't say that I love this digital cluster, but it does the job reasonably tidily and with enough customization that it feels worthwhile. In the center here, we've got our usual infotainment display. In this up-trimmed A-Spec Elite model, it's a larger 9-inch screen, but the base models like the Civics get a 7-inch. Now, that doesn't matter a ton to me either way, because the native infotainment in this isn't all that good. It's starting to feel really long in the tooth, and it honestly didn't feel great even when these 11th gen platform cars were new. Now, you can go into wireless Apple CarPlay or Android Auto to minimize your exposure to that, which is very welcome. However, it will generally take a little bit of time to actually boot up at startup, and I have found it to be somewhat inconsistent or unreliable on that front, with it occasionally failing to recognize the phone at all. Other times, even when the Bluetooth pairs, the projection doesn't actually seem to pick up for some reason until I turn the car off and on again. So it goes. It's not the end of the world, but it's not something that I'm used to having to think about much anymore. Within that too, I've got to say that the backup camera views are just not all that great. You get a couple options, including one that points directly downward from the license plate to really gauge how close you are to a curb as you reverse. It's neat, it's handy, it's useful, but ultimately there are clearer, more high quality feeling digital experiences out there. That's not what you're going to buy this car for. Now, something you may want to buy this car or its Civic siblings for is safety, because these things come out really strong in those fields. Of particular note, Honda has done a really neat job with airbag innovation. This is something that they've been running for a few years now. It isn't necessarily news, but a lot of drivers don't realize it. Honda calls it their catcher's mitt, and that's because the steering wheel airbag here, when it deploys, isn't just a round pillow, but rather a cocoon that wraps around the face to make sure you're protected, reduce the risk of neck injuries, a whole bunch of stuff. In addition to that, you've also got standard seat side airbags in the back there to keep the kids safe. There's a lot going for this. It's not just Volvos for safety anymore. Those IIHS Top Pick Awards were well deserved. So then, with all of that, which way do you go? Well, there is that base A-Spec model that's from just above $42,000 after destination. This here A-Spec Elite that has those upgraded speakers, that has the larger screen, that has adaptive dampers that can stiffen or soften when you want sporty driving, that has larger 18-inch wheels versus the standard 17s, and that has a heads-up display projecting information right there into the windscreen, well, that's going to come in at just under $48,000. If you really want to get spicy too, there is the near $60,000 Integra Type S. That is Golf R money, but I would say more fun than you're going to get in the Golf R. Now, important to note for the enthusiast crowd who grew up loving Civics, you can get that 6-speed manual in that mid-trim Elite A-Spec, but not in the base trim. This is similar to the Civic, where normally it's just the CVT, but if you go to the Civic Si from about $37,000, that you can get that as well. Whichever trim you go for though, do not fall for the marketing. This leather is synthetic leather, just as vegan leather is not leather. It's vinyl, and the suede inserts here in the Elite are nice and take away from the vinyl-y feeling of it overall, but just make sure you know what you're buying. With all of that laid out though, would I still buy an Integra over one of the competitors? See, looking against this, you've got some actually pretty nice Civic models, and whereas you can get a hybrid Civic for commuting, you can't get this hybrid. You're still looking at relatively okay fuel economy figures of 8.1 city, 6.5 liters per 100 highway, and 7.4 liters per 100 kilometers combined. Now, in testing, I've been averaging high 9s combined, so that's about 2 higher. That being said, I've also been driving a little bit enthusiastically and mostly in the city. Really though, I don't know whether I would actually make the spend on this over a VW Golf GLI. The GLI has just been refreshed or renewed into an 8th generation. It's really just a facelift of the previous. But that thing still comes with a manual, now a 7-speed manual in fact, and that tops out at $37,000 after destination. That's a really compelling value, and VW knows this. They have positioned this as a very aggressive, still somewhat premium feeling, but high value offering. If the sporty drive is important to you, there's also the Elantra N, which is a little bit less mature, a little bit less sedate, but is absolutely a whole lot more fun. Those things price from $42,000 now, so they aren't quite that phenomenal value that they were when they first launched in the mid-30s, but it's still something to consider, and especially now that they've given it a facelift and kind of reduced the ugliness from back when it came out. As mentioned, there's the Civic Si, which comes $37,700 or so, and you can actually get with a CVT as well. Then, of course, there is the tried and true Subaru WRX. That is just the old Impreza sedan. They just market it as something a little bit more fun now that they've gotten rid of the spicy model altogether. Those things, depending on which you get, will cost you $40,000 to $50,000 if you go for the really all-out model, the TS. Now, those TSs are pretty sweet and have a really serious suspension setup. While this thing has its adaptive damping, the TS is just something a little bit more. Now, with that being said, the WRX feels old, and in many ways is old. It's a rather simple car, and it's got a lot of things that feel rather cheap in ways that this doesn't necessarily. As a nostalgist and an enthusiast, I really like being in a WRX, but it's not the car I would recommend over this. Really, you should be looking either this way or VW Jetta up to or including GLI. Between those though, I think ultimately this is probably where I put my money. $47,000 are a lot to swallow, and especially when you remember that the Civic can now be had as that really competitive hybrid model. I know they're speaking to slightly different niches and trying to go for a slightly different buyer, but I do think that the cleverest buyers are those who are open-minded enough to consider what other alternatives are around them. If you like how these Civics drive, how they behave, the spirit and ethos behind them, as well as the really strong safety perks that they bring, well, I think that may be a really solid way to go. For Driving.ca, I'm Mel Alder.